The Untold Story of Elijah, a prophet beyond time, Elisha's source of power. You think you've seen power? You think you've seen miracles? You think you've witnessed the might of the Almighty? Then you haven't seen Elijah. He was not just a prophet, he was a force of nature, a man who walked with the fire of heaven in his veins. Kings feared him, false prophets trembled before him, and when he spoke, the very heavens listened. My name is Elisha, and I followed the greatest prophet Israel has ever known. This is the story of his triumph, his miracles, and his fiery departure.
I first saw his fire when he stood against the prophets of Baal. Imagine it, one man against 450. The crowd watched, unsure, as Elijah faced the false prophets on Mount Carmel. Their god, Baal, was supposed to answer their prayers with fire, so Elijah let them go first.
From morning until noon they chanted, they danced, they cut themselves, spilling their own blood, thinking their God would hear them. They cried out in desperation, their voices growing hoarse under the blazing sun.
Elijah laughed. "Shout louder," he mocked. "Maybe your God is deep in thought. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's sleeping and needs to be awakened." The prophets of Baal screamed louder, their bodies smeared with their own blood, yet nothing happened. Not a single spark. The people murmured. Doubt crept into their faces. Then Elijah stepped forward. He rebuilt the altar of the Lord, stacked the wood, and then, just to make things interesting, he drenched everything in water. 3 times. Water filled the trenches around the altar, soaking everything. The crowd gasped. How could fire consume what was drowning in water? Then, he lifted his hands and prayed.
Answer me, O Lord, so these people will know that you are God.
And then it happened.
Fire fell from heaven. Not just a flame, an inferno. It devoured the sacrifice, the wood, the very stones of the altar. The water in the trench? Gone, evaporated in an instant. The ground trembled with the heat. The crowd fell to their faces, shouting, "The Lord, He is God!" The prophets of Baal scattered in terror.
But miracles don't come without enemies. And Elijah's greatest enemy was none other than Queen Jezebel, a woman as ruthless as she was determined. She wasn't just any queen. She was a priestess of Baal, the very god Elijah humiliated on Mount Carmel. She had spent years poisoning Israel with idol worship, silencing prophets, and bending the people to her will. And now, Elijah had shattered her control in a single fiery moment. Her gods were exposed as powerless, her prophets slain. She was humiliated before the nation, and for that, she swore revenge. She vowed that by the next day, Elijah would be as dead as those he had defeated. She sent her messengers with a chilling decree, and Elijah knew Jezebel was not one to make empty threats. Elijah lay beneath a tree, weak and broken. Then an angel of the Lord touched him, saying, "Get up and eat." Before him was fresh bread and water. Strengthened, he traveled 40 days and nights until he reached a cave on Mount Horeb. There God spoke, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in fire, but in a gentle whisper.
That whisper sent him back. He didn't just anoint kings. He raised empires from the dust and shattered the chains of oppression. He didn't just bring judgment. He struck terror into the hearts of kings and queens who thought themselves untouchable. He didn't just find me. He ignited a fire within me, a fire that burned with the power of heaven itself. But it was Queen Jezebel who was the true test of Elijah's legacy. She had poisoned the land, corrupted the hearts of Israel, and turned her kingdom into a stronghold for the false gods. She thought herself invincible. She thought the fires of Mount Carmel had only momentarily shaken her grip on power. But she was wrong. When Elijah was gone, it was I who rose to face her. In her arrogance, she sent assassins to strike me down, but I called on the Lord, and with a single prayer, the heavens responded. Earthquakes split the land beneath her feet, and winds howled like the fury of angels. Jezebel's reign came crashing down, not by sword, but by divine judgment. The prophets of Baal, who she had once commanded, were scattered in terror, and her kingdom crumbled under the weight of truth. Her strength faltered, and in her final moments, she knew that the fire of the Lord, which had burned on Mount Carmel, had now consumed her entire house. I stood tall, unwavering, as the forces of darkness were driven from Israel. The people, once enslaved by her lies, rejoiced as freedom swept across the land.
And then the day came. Elijah had fought and won, but Israel's heart remained divided. His mission was nearing its end, and the burden he carried had taken its toll. Yet the Lord had chosen a different end for him, not death, but glory.
We walked together, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, each step heavier than the last. The other prophets whispered, "The Lord is taking Elijah today." I knew it too, but I refused to leave him. Then by the Jordan River he turned to me.
Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken.
My heart pounded. Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit.
He smiled, but his eyes were distant. You have asked a hard thing, but if you see me when I am taken, it shall be so.
And then the sky split apart.
A whirlwind tore through the air. The ground shook. The wind howled like a storm from the heavens. And then, from the skies, came a chariot of fire, pulled by horses of flame. It rushed between us, heat radiating off its burning frame. Before I could reach for him,
Elijah was lifted, rising higher and higher, caught in the whirlwind, his robe billowing, his face calm, as if he knew all along this was his fate.
he was gone. I screamed, "My father! My father! The chariots of Israel and its horsemen!" But there was no answer, only silence. Then, something drifted down from the heavens. His mantle.
The very symbol of his anointing. The very fire he carried.
I picked it up, shaking, overwhelmed. The fire of Elijah, the fire of the Lord, was now mine to carry. The air still crackled with energy, the presence of heaven lingering. I turned to the Jordan River, still and waiting. Taking the mantle, I struck the waters just as he had before. "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?"
And the waters parted.
I stepped forward, knowing that Elijah may have been taken in fire, but his God remained. And now, my story begins.
And so, the fire of Elijah was passed on to Elisha. With the mantle of the prophet, he took up the call, but his journey was far from over. The Lord was with him, just as he had been with Elijah, and Elisha witnessed the mighty power of God in ways that echoed the miracles of his predecessor. He healed the sick, parted the waters, and even brought the dead back to life. Yet, the greatest challenges lay ahead, facing the corruption of Israel, contending with kings, and standing against the forces of darkness. Just like Elijah, Elisha confronted false prophets and stood firm in his faith. But through it all, he trusted in the God who had called him, and the fire of Elijah burned bright within him. His journey didn't end with the passing of the mantle, but what became of him? What trials did he face, and how did his life shape the future of Israel? If you want to discover more about what happened next, please like and share, and stay tuned as we continue the journey in Chapter 2, the story of Elisha.